Hi, welcome to CMMC Automation. On this channel, we share with you tips on how to automate your CMMC compliance efforts using ChatGPT to save your company considerable time and resources. My name is Derek Phillips. I am the president and founder of Aspire Cyber. We specialize in helping small defense contractors prepare for their CMMC assessments. Also, I am a certified CMMC assessor and instructor. Let's get to the content.
In today's video, I'll be showing you how to use ChatGPT to automate the compliance activities for AC.L2-3.1.5 lease privilege. Let's get to it. As always, we're in the CMMC Level 2 Assessment Guide, which outlines the practice, assessment objectives, test methods, discussion, and examples. So for 3.1.5 lease privilege, we're going to start off with looking at the practice, which is employ the principle of lease privilege, including the specific security functions and privilege accounts. So with lease privilege, essentially, you want to ensure that your employees, everyone that has access to the sensitive systems, and in this context, systems that process, transmit, or store CUI, you want to ensure that they only have lease privileges. As outlined in the assessment guide, the principle of lease privilege is applied with the goal of authorized privileges no higher than necessary to accomplish required organizational, mission, or business functions. So if they don't need those privileges, they don't need to be a local admin on their laptop. If they don't need to be an admin on other sensitive systems, don't make them. Make sure that they have only the least privileges that they need to accomplish their mission. It's also important to understand that the principle of least privilege applies to all users and processes on all systems, but is critical to systems containing or accessing CUI. So you need to apply these same principles throughout your entire organization, not just your CUI boundary. For the scope of a CMMC Level 2 assessment, focusing on those CUI systems. So now that we have that context, let's jump into ChatGPT. So we're back in the same conversation that we've been using for all of the previous videos in the access control domain for CMMC. We'll be starting by giving ChatGPT some context. So I will provide you with the NIST SP 80171 practices and assessment objectives. And I want you to provide me with concise responses that include administrative controls, technical solutions, and frequency of the activities. I do not need a response for this prompt. So remember, every time we enter something into the prompt section, we're prompting ChatGPT for a response, but I'm telling ChatGPT I don't need a response. I'm just giving you context. ChatGPT, understood, ready to rock and roll. Also, before we get started, I want to always remind you that with ChatGPT, you do want to ensure that you're not inputting sensitive information into the prompt. So you don't want to input sensitive information about your organization that's specific to your security controls, the name of your organization, any information that is confidential or proprietary, not public. You don't want to enter into ChatGPT because now that information is leaving your organization and you're at that point entrusting it to OpenAI, which is the company that makes ChatGPT. We always want to be security conscious. ChatGPT is a fantastic tool, but within limitations. Now that ChatGPT is ready, has the appropriate context that it needs, we will get started. First, so employ the principle of least privilege, including those specific security functions and privilege accounts. That is the practice for 3.1.5. Now, ChatGPT is telling us to employ the principle of least privilege. We need to define the minimum necessary privileges. What are those minimum privileges that each employee needs to perform their duties? Then we need to assign those privileges based on roles. In the previous videos, we talked a lot about role-based access control. So for example, if you are serving in the role of IT, you're going to have specific responsibilities in that IT role, or if you're in HR or marketing, we want to be able to define the privileges and functions, transactions, responsibilities based on the role. We need to regularly review and update privileges. Talked about if employees are changing roles within organizations, getting promoted, or just moving to a different team. Want to make sure we're regularly reviewing the privileges and making sure that we're following the principle of least privilege. Should we have strong authentication, multi-factor authentication? When logging into systems as a privileged user, we'll make sure we have multi-factor authentication on those accounts. Just another layer of defense. So if that privileged user's credentials are compromised, then you have the multi-factor authentication, which is another layer to prevent that unauthorized access. Definitely we always need our monitoring and logging. If you're not monitoring and logging those activities that privileged users are performing on your systems by using like a SIM, for example, then you don't have visibility. You don't know what's going on. Always need to provide training, ongoing training to educate employees on the importance of least privilege and their responsibilities for maintaining proper controls. In my initial prompt, I asked ChatGPT about including the frequency of compliance activities. Just give you an idea how frequent you need to be performing these compliance activities. So as far as privilege accounts and updates needs to be ongoing, regular reviews, at least quarterly, semi-annually. The more frequent, the better, but yeah, at least quarterly. Monitoring and logging is ongoing. We need real-time alerts. We can't just look at alerts once a month because everything that happened prior to us reviewing those alerts, hey, it's too late. By that time, our system could be compromised. Malicious actors could have already exfiltrated our CUI or accessed that CUI. So we need to have real-time alerts and make sure we're regularly reviewing our logs. Then training should be at a minimum annually, but in reality it needs to be ongoing. I would say more so quarterly. So this gives you an overview of how we can accomplish 3.1.5 practice. And of course, now we're about to go into the assessment objectives. First assessment objective is privileged accounts are identified. So we need to inventory our systems and applications. That's really the starting point. Okay, what systems and applications do we have? What systems and applications process, transmit, or store CUI? Identify all our account types, our basic user accounts, our privilege accounts, our local admin accounts, etc. for each system and application. Then we're going to map roles to those accounts. So you're in the IT administrator role, or you're in the system owner role, developer, etc. Then we need to list user and elevate privileges. We need to list the users that have elevated privileges. So this is an example of an artifact that most likely an assessor will want to review during that CMMC level 2 assessment. Okay, let me see your list of privileged users. If you can't produce that list, then that's a problem because, okay, now you don't know who your privileged users are, so obviously you're not tracking, reviewing their access, etc. You need to document those privileged account details. And an important thing to understand is with privileged accounts, their user account details, such as the username and password, those credentials should be different than their basic user account. And they should only be using that elevated privilege account when performing those privileged activities. It shouldn't just be a single username and password that allows them to access both their basic accounts and then also their privilege accounts. We want to keep them separate. And again, that's another form of defense in depth. Having that centralized repository, something like Active Directory or Okta or some type of identity access management solution that's centralized. So when I say, okay, as an assessor, let me see your privileged users, you can pull that down based on from your central repository, from your LDAP, for example. So these are some steps that we can follow to satisfy and provide evidence for that the first assessment objective for 3.1.5. There are a total of 4 assessment objectives for 3.1.5. So now moving on to the second one. Access to privileged accounts is authorized in accordance with the principle of least privilege. We want to make sure we define role-based access control. We talked a lot about RBAC throughout this domain. Continue doing our regular reviews. As I've discussed in previous videos, a lot of the controls are going to overlap. So make sure that we have implement access control. We have tight controls around our access control list to limit access to resources. Monitor and audit those privileged activities. Manage temporary elevated activities. So for example, if a third party, one of your vendors needs access, like your managed service provider needs admin access to perform an activity, we're only providing that temporary elevated privilege, and then we're removing that elevated privilege once that maintenance is performed. Always conducting our user training. That training is ongoing. Like if you don't train your employees on the proper processes and setting the expectations of protecting the confidentiality of CUI, being responsible with their elevated privileges, and they won't know. They'll definitely going to make mistakes. It's going to be unintentional errors or intentional errors. Then we need to establish a change management process. Whenever a user is granted privileges, there needs to be a workflow for that. There needs to be the individual that's creating an account, the person that's approving the account, the person that's requesting the account. So there needs to be a change management process. Now moving on to assessment objective number 3. Security functions are identified. Remember, we really did this at the practice level, but yeah, we need to identify those key systems and applications. What are the functions? What are those security functions? We need to have those listed out. And now ChatGPT is giving us examples of security functions. So access control, encryption, decryption, security monitoring, incident response, firewall management, backup disasters. Give examples of some security functions where we need to list out and identify who has those elevated privileges. We're assigning personnel, responsible personnel, documenting security functions, communicating and training. For the fourth and last assessment objective in this practice, access to security functions is authorized in accordance with the principle of least privilege. And ChatGPT just provided us a list of some example security functions. Obviously, we can continue to prompt ChatGPT for additional guidance on security functions. But we need to follow these steps to satisfy this assessment objective. We need to review those roles and responsibilities, which was kind of a recurring theme throughout this practice. Make sure we establish a role-based access control, limit privileged account access. Everyone shouldn't have privileged access. That should be tightly controlled and limited. Always need to monitor, regular review, strong authentication methods such as multi-factor authentication. Ideally, you want to use multi-factor authentication throughout your entire organization, but at a minimum, you're going to be using it for those privilege accounts. You need that extra layer of defense because privilege accounts are going to be a prime target for malicious actors. ChatGPT has provided substantial guidance for how to satisfy practice 3.1.5 and the corresponding 4 assessment objectives. But clearly, we're not going to stop there. We're going to continue to prompt ChatGPT for additional information, more examples, and just to ensure we have a full understanding of what is expected of our organization to ensure that that practice is fully met during that CMMC level 2 assessment. We're aiming for that perfect 110 score. In the assessment guide under the potential assessment methods, it mentioned examine a list of system generated privilege accounts. So I want to prompt ChatGPT with this information and see what additional guidance it can provide us. The list of system generated privilege accounts. So it'll be created by the operating systems, application, or services. The Windows operating system, so the administrator has a built-in administrator account system. Linux has root. Database, so just kind of giving you guidance, context in terms of each system is going to have system generated privilege accounts. So you'll be checking for these accounts to make sure who has access to those. Directory. We talked about Microsoft Active Directory, LDAP. The default administrator account for LDAP services. Admin for network devices. So you want to be able to list out all of these different types of default system privilege accounts and ensure that we have auditing and logging around those and they're tightly controlled. We know who has that administrative access. Next, I'm going to prompt ChatGPT to provide us with practical examples of least privilege in a small company. I always like to have those practical examples just to give more context, a better understanding of what the practice is requiring. So we see with the role-based access, controls, HR, accounting, those are all different roles. So they're going to have different access to applications, different job functions. So we want to limit the administrative privileges. Talked about using separate accounts for privilege activities. That is very important. Restrict access to sensitive data. To make sure we have our network segmentation. We talked about having a CUI enclave or VLAN, for example. Certainly want to limit remote access. We want to restrict that remote access. Remote access is commonly exploited by cyber criminals, malicious actors. For example, like a remote desktop or anything that allows remote access. You want to make sure you have that, either disable it or make sure you have tight controls around it, because that is often a path in for those cyber criminals to breach your systems. You can kind of lock it down by making sure you're using multi-factor authentication and or VPN, regular reviews. Next, I'm going to prompt ChatGPT to give practical examples of types of privileged accounts that malicious actors commonly exploit and how small companies can harden those accounts. So malicious actors commonly exploit the privileged accounts that have extensive access to critical systems, those administrator accounts. So to harden your administrator accounts, we want to limit the number of administrators, make sure we enforce strong passwords and multi-factor authentication. Service accounts, we haven't talked about that today. That's one that's commonly overlooked by small businesses or even large organizations. What privileges do those service accounts have? We want to make sure that we have the same security controls on their service accounts. Domain admin accounts. That's certainly going to be a prime target for malicious actors. Certainly want to have a small number of domain admins. Avoid using those credentials for everyday tasks. We'll have separate login credentials. Multi-factor authentication, smart cards, database administrators, privileged third-party accounts. That's another one you can't forget about. If a third party has access to your systems, your managed service provider, or any third party, want to ensure that you're only granting them temporary access only when necessary, you're enforcing least privilege, and you're monitoring their activities. Root or super user, want to avoid using it in everyday tasks. Or remote accounts, this is a big one. Can provide malicious actors that entry point. We want to avoid them being able to have a remote access to our systems. So some good guidance on the type of accounts you want to make sure that you don't overlook, tightly manage, and monitor. Okay, so at this point, as a certified CMMC provisional assessor and instructor, I'm happy with the guidance that Chat. I think the guidance is certainly substantial and will give you, as an organization seeking certification for CMMC Level 2, certainly set you on the right path. Now we're at the point where I want to summarize all of the guidance that ChatGPT has provided. So I'm saying in chart format, I want to consolidate all of the guidance provided today, including administrative controls, names of specific technical controls, estimated time to implement, dollar range for estimated costs, complexity to implement each control, and priority. So in terms of the time, clearly this is just a rough estimate. The more information you give ChatGPT about the type of project you're working on, technology you're using, the estimates will be more accurate, same as costs. But again, keeping in mind, you're not providing sensitive information, you're just giving general information. For example, if I say, okay, ChatGPT, I'm trying to harden my Windows 11 system. That's not sensitive information about your organization. It's just general information. Then ChatGPT can give you more specific guidance related to Windows 11. You're not telling ChatGPT the name of your organization, any other specifics that can help identify organization, but just more general information that will give ChatGPT more context to better provide you with an accurate estimate. Now this prompt will serve for our purposes for this video. And clearly you can change these prompts around as much as you want. I just want to give you a starting point. But really, I've always liked to summarize these videos with a chart because it really gives us actionable guidance and really kind of puts it in a semi-project plan for us. So first, we need to identify those privileged accounts, make sure we have an inventory of the accounts, maybe using some type of account management software, a centralized Active Directory, for example. Implement least privilege, role-based access control, make sure we're securing all those administrator accounts, hardening our service accounts, securing domain admin accounts, database administrator accounts, third-party accounts. So it's breaking down to us all of the responses we received throughout this discussion today. It's breaking down, putting it into a chart format so we can know what we want to prioritize and focus our efforts. Well, there you have it. We just covered how to satisfy the 3.1.5 practice and also the corresponding 4 assessment objectives. ChatGPT provided us substantial guidance to get started and automate a lot of the compliance activities. If you have any comments, feedback, I certainly welcome that and appreciate any feedback that you provide. Also, if you have any special requests, you can also leave that in the comments, or even better yet, you can reach out to me directly at dphillips@aspirecyber.com. I'm always happy to talk about CMMC and provide you any guidance that you need. On that note, I'll be back with 3.1.6 in our next video.
Thanks for watching CMMC Automation. I hope that you got a lot of value from today's video and you use ChatGPT to automate your CMMC efforts. It's going to save your company a lot of time and money. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me at Aspire Cyber. Also, you can leave your questions in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe because it helps out this channel immensely. I really appreciate it, and good luck to you on your CMMC journey.